106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
from Bethel over on Michigan, that although this happened in this circumstance, I'm grateful that we were able to step forward and do so to be able to host. Dr. King spoke here in on July 22nd, 1957, which was our 110th church anniversary. He came an additional 2 more times, but his friend, Reverend Archibald Carey Jr., was the senior pastor here. He was an alderman in the 3rd Ward. He used to pastor Woodlawn AME Church before he came to Quinn to pastor here. I bring up Archibald Carey Jr., who there's a bell in the back that was in our bell tower that his family left to say this. In this thing called life, you're going to have people who you call friend along the way. We all heard Dr. King from the Washington Mall, where he encouraged us to let freedom ring from this mountaintop and that mountaintop and this one and that one. Well, I want to tell you, our friend Dilla, the TikTok historian, says everything cool about America comes from Chicago. Dr. King borrowed that crescendo about going to this mountain and that mountain from the Reverend Archibald Carey Jr., who was his friend. Some 11 years before being on the mall at the Washington Monument, Archibald Carey says that from the Republican National Convention here in the city of Chicago. And so I'm encouraging all of you, if we think about Dr. King's legacy, what's changed since he was here? Not much. Not much has changed since he was here last, but you all have an opportunity to make change. And so whoever ends up in that seat, use it wisely, because God will ask what you did when you had it. Amen.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Reverend Ben Brown from Bethel AME.
Thank you. To the forum, to my fellow brothers and sisters, citizens of Chicago, I greet you in the mighty, matchless name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. I want to thank the forum for this opportunity to host such an event, a wonderful event that's needed. Bethel was unable, due to that big freeze that we had, to host. Called on my brother, Reverend Venning, who picked up the pieces right away, and we were able to have this event. Praise the Lord for it. We thank you so very much. I believe it was Martin Luther King who said, "We will live as brothers, or we will perish as fools." There's a lot of division in our nation right now that goes from the federal government all the way down to the municipalities. There's a problem in our nation when you can lie, get to Congress, everybody know it, and you can't do nothing about it. So it is my prayer, it is my fervent prayer that whatever, whoever, whichever takes power here in this city, that we would work together to build a better Chicago. Not a north side, not a south side, not a west side, and you can argue by the east side. Regardless of Chicago altogether. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Ben Brown. Our next speaker is Dr. Barbara J. Norman. Dr. Barbara J. Norman, she is the former Chicago Deputy Health Commissioner under Mayor Harold Washington, and she also was a captain of the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynette, and to Reverend Venning and Reverend Brown, and to all of you that are here. It's an honor to participate. I see on the schedule my role is to share with you the history, our goal, our mission. I see the timer. I have a minute to go. So basically, just briefly, how did we come together with this, preparing for this forum? It was 2 years ago, as president of the American Public Health Association, we're in attendance at a meeting where several doctors from World Health Organization and from China and from Switzerland were there discussing this unusual number of patients that were being seen in their clinics. All of them were sharing similar signs and symptoms of respiratory distress, difficulty breathing, tiredness. This was in November of 2019. When we left that conference coming back to Chicago, at the time, it did not have a name. In December of 2019, the name was formulated. It was called COVID. COVID-19, that all of us been affected one way or another, directly or indirectly. First case that was observed and diagnosed in Chicago was in January of 2020. We know the rest. We know the number of patients that we were seeing were primarily African Americans, people of color, those that we believed did not have the resources and services in order to treat our clients. It was later in coming into my mission. Why did we get together? We're a group of multi-ethnic, multicultural, intergenerational, that's me, representative of our people, of our community. Our purpose of coming together, the mission, the goal, is to help the city of Chicago to decrease the use of public dollars, using it for privatizing groups and organizations throughout our city. And the purpose of our meeting today, and identify the candidates, or at least to hear their response as to what they can do to help our people to improve the quality of life. And I thank you for being here. I'm raised in a church, so you know it's hard to keep me to 2 minutes, but I will abide to the rules and regulations. Thank you so much, okay?
Thank you, Dr. Norman. Our next speaker is Dr. Howard Ehrman. Dr. Howard Ehrman worked under the Chicago Department of Public Health as the Assistant Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Lynette. First, I want to thank Reverend Benning and Reverend Brown for making these incredible arrangements at the last minute. In 1989, Mayor Richard M. Daley stated publicly, "There are too many poor people in Chicago." Since then, no city has destroyed, closed, cut, and privatized more public services, housing, public jobs, and sold more public land than Chicago. 25,000 CHA units were bulldozed. LeClaire Courts, Abla, Stateway Gardens, Cabrini Green, and thousands of those families are still living in Des Moines, Iowa, Rockford, Quad Cities, waiting to come back to Chicago with a letter in their hand telling them in 1 year you're going to get a new apartment. CHA recently has continued to sell our public land. LeClaire Courts, the Stateway Gardens area, where the people in that neighborhood who are Chinese and African Americans are opposed to a new CPS school at that site, and yet CPS and the mayor went ahead with it. We are opposed to all forms of privatizations to corporations, most of whom are outside Chicago, that are stealing thousands of public jobs that people lived and died for, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. No city has closed more schools than Chicago, and who still has 140 private charter schools, most of which we fund with our city dollars, our tax money that we've worked hard for. In 1997, 1998, the CTA had the greatest service cuts in history, cutting 20% of the bus service in 1997, including a lot of overnight routes. And then in 1998, cutting overnight service on what is now the green line, the pink line, and the brown line. No city and county's public health department was cut more. When we left, there were 2,000 people in 1991. There were 57 facilities, including 19 mental health centers. Now there are 600 people, 13 facilities, and 5 understaffed health centers. We could continue to go down the line, but I think you get the point. We are here to hear what the candidates have to say, but regardless of what they say, we are here to rebuild the people's movement in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we're about to begin the question section for our mayoral candidates. But right before we begin, Lieutenant Gregory Jackson would like to give us some house rules. Lieutenant Jackson.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to try that again. That was a little lukewarm. Good afternoon. All right. I think Pastor Troy has already touched on most of the things, but again, housekeeping. Due to the climate that we're operating in, we request that you keep your mask on and please govern your brother or sister next to you. In addition to that, be aware of the exit signs. Bathrooms are to my immediate left, to your right. Men and women, if you need anything, multiple individuals are floating around, just don't hesitate to ask. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to begin our questions for the mayoral candidates. Right before we begin, each candidate will be asked one question by each panelist, and the candidates will have 75 seconds. Erin, right here, she's our designated time person, and she's going to hold up at 30 seconds and at 15 seconds. Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask the first question to the candidates. My question is regard to lead pipes. As mayor, what will you do to replace the 400,000 Chicago lead water pipes, more than any city in the country? In Chicago, Black, brown, Asian residents are twice as likely to live in communities with lead water pipes. 95% of the lead water pipes in the state are in Black and brown communities, and that's regardless of income. What will you do to help residents and businesses pay to replace lead water pipes? Do you pledge to hire Chicago public union workers from our communities most affected to replace the lead pipes? Yes or no? And if so, when, how, what, and why? And the first question is for State Representative Kam Buckner.
There it is. Good afternoon. Thank you for that question. And so the first thing I'll say is that the lead pipe issue in the city is a real one that we have to find a way to solve. The previous administration pretended as if it was not an issue. This administration has acknowledged it, but they failed to do anything about it. We do have more lead service pipes than any other city in this country. And I know that the question asks, what will we do to help residents pay for it? I think that's the wrong question. Residents should have to pay for this at all. This is a city issue. And the reason that it's a city issue is because up until 1986, the city code required that we use lead service pipes for all of our buildings, right? And so this is an issue that the city created and that the city should be paying for. We need to cut up the city into triage zones and figure out what areas need the most remediation quickly. We also need to provide filters to homes that have specifically children and pregnant women in them so that the lead doesn't continue to eradicate them. And lastly, we got to find a cheap way to do it and do it effectively by creating a jobs program to do it right, getting people from our community to be trained in lead service pipe removal.
Thank you so much, State Representative Kam Buckner. I'm sorry, I should have stated earlier. So we're going from alphabetical order from last name. Jamal Green, you have time to answer the question.
I ain't cut my mic off. I can. All right. It's my brother. First of all, thank you guys so much for being here. I want to thank Reverend Venin. Love even being in this room and in this church and all that you are doing and the history that you are continuing to teach. In regards to our lead problem, you know, Kam is exactly right. You know, this is a problem that's been going on for many years. We don't know the effects, right? When you talk about young kids that are constantly drinking lead water each and every day in these neighborhoods, this must be addressed. We got over 380,000 lead pipes. Lori Lightfoot claimed that she would move forward a plan, and there's federal dollars that came through in infrastructure funding already that it's already a postmark for removing lead pipes, and they haven't used it. They changed 400 in the last 4 years out of the 380,000. We have to prohibit lead service lines in our city. We need a massive jobs program and make sure that the unions have first dibs on the jobs here, and make it easier for folks in the neighborhoods to be a part of, whether it's apprenticeships, and be a part of those good paying jobs, because this can be a great way to get folks in the field, as well as, I'm sorry, I see you now. Your hand, this is the hand right here. Okay, I got it. As well as make sure that they got a pipeline to a middle class lifestyle.
Thank you. Next is Alderman Roderick Sawyer.
Thank you. I really would, and this is one of those questions where I think you're not going to get too much of a different answer. I do join in what Representative Buckner stated as related to on-hands, on-deck of policy that we have to do. This is a several billion-dollar issue that we have to acknowledge, and we want to make sure that we do it, and do it first for those that are least able to afford to pay for it. So one of the things that I think we should be proposing, although I'm not a big TIF fan, the concept of a residential TIF with the sole purpose of replacing these pipes might be a viable option, where we can pay for the ones in the most blighted areas, for those that need it most that can't afford to pay for it, and we can work it out that way. But again, we need federal help. We need proper allocation, like Mr. Green stated, of those federal dollars that we were receiving. And it has to be, again, I don't know how many times I'm going to say this today, it's got to be the intentionality that you want to have this done. And that starts at the top. You have to make sure that you have an official that really understands that this is a serious problem that needs to be addressed immediately. And I think that this is something that I would safely say that we all will, if any one of us, but I'm going to say as me as mayor, will accomplish right away, working together with individuals from the state and federal side.
Thank you so much. Former CPS CEO Paul Vallas.
There's no greater priority than to remove lead from the water now, and you can't wait 10, 15, 20 years to replace the lead pipes. Lead filtration system, water filtration systems need to be made available to every house. There's the financial resources to do that, period. Let me also point out, even when you replace all the lead pipes, and there is accelerated technology that allows you to do that right away, you still have cancer-causing contaminants in the drinking water, and the Tribune did an expose about all the other cancer-causing contaminants. So even the lead pipe replacements is not going to address that issue. Insofar as lead pipe replacements, you can use TIF monies, as my colleagues have indicated. You could issue bonds, amortize the interest, pay for the TIF monies from revenues that will be available when the existing tax increment financing districts expire, and you could use that money, you could raise billions to not only do lead pipe replacement, to do affordable housing, to do other environmental remediation throughout the communities that have long been neglected. But there's no greater priority. If Flint and if Newark can get the lead out of their water literally in record time, Chicago should too.
Thank you. Hello? 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 Dr. Barbara Norman will have the second question.
Oh, thank you. Am I on? For my question relates to health, public health. As mayor of the city of Chicago, do you pledge to rebuild the Chicago Department of Public Health and employ more public health nurses, public health educators, community health workers, and reopen the community-based clinics, maternal child health clinics, mental health, and for the resident and hire residents from the community, pay them full wages, pledge they receive full benefits, as you are paying these outside private contractors to come in our community to do the job? That's my question. Answer yes, no, and how you gonna do it?
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going in the same order. So State Representative Kam Buckner, you're first to answer.
Thank you for that question. So the answer is absolutely yes, to begin with. Secondly, I'll say that the privatization of our public health system has been one of the most egregious slights against this community that I've seen in a very long time, right? Privatization of public health, in fact, makes it not public health anymore. It makes it a for-profit system that does not do what it's supposed to do for the people that it's supposed to work for. When we look at what this pandemic taught us about our priorities in public health, the light that has been shown on us, we know we got to do a much better job. So I've pledged not only to reopen the mental health clinics, as well as have 4 of those clinics be 24-hour clinics, but we've also pledged to do a better job of the maternal clinics, the community-based clinics, and we have to have a real conversation about the fact that HIV/AIDS, the numbers are going down in every single community in this country except for the African American community. And we know that we have service-based providers doing the work on the ground who are not getting the dollars, not getting the resources. The City of Chicago Department of Public Health has to change that.
Thank you. Jamal Green, you got it.
Absolutely, yes. You know, what's happened under this administration and previous administrations with privatizations is utterly ridiculous, and we got to stop standing for it. What happened many years ago under the Mayoral administration when he shut down, they decided to shut down the mental health clinics. You know, all these years later, we're still trying to fight this administration to reopen them. And she has came forward to say that she's not. This is a travesty. We need to make sure that we reopen up the mental health clinics throughout the city of Chicago. And, you know, they also have an ordinance in place, treatment, not trauma, and we need to support that ordinance so that we have the dollars, you know, for public health in those clinics. Now, one of our ideas with the clinics is, you know, we like to call them wellness centers or healing houses, where we can really tackle mental health holistically, where there are institutions that people want to go and we can address the stigma on mental health, where it's not just, you know, psychiatry or treatment, it's yoga, it's boxing, it's massage therapy, it's spa services. We need institutions that have all of the different ways that you can tackle mental health holistically, and those are the ones that we want to build.
Thank you. Next is for Commissioner Brandon Johnson.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And I do apologize for my tardiness. The last church that I went to was Church of God in Christ, that raised me, and you know how we get. But yes, I'm definitely in favor of all that which you laid out. In fact, the treatment not trauma ordinance, the chief sponsor of that has endorsed my candidacy. The treatment not trauma movement is behind my candidacy. And so, look, let's just say it, okay? Privatization has been one of the wicked tools used against black people and brown people. It's why I fought against privatization, right? Where black teachers were fired, black children were undermined. So privatization schemes are not only wicked, but it is very costly because we see what it looks like in our school buildings, right? They're not clean, right? I was just at a press conference standing with families at McCallum where the lead that is moving through those buildings are astronomical. And of course, you know, finally reopening the mental health clinics is a top priority. I lost a brother who had untreated trauma and he died here addicted and unhoused. So it's definitely the commitment of mine. I fought the last administration and I'm fighting this administration as mayor of Chicago. I'm committed to reopening them. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Sawyer.
Thank you. During this past term, when I became chairman of the Health and Human Relations Committee, one of the first things I did was go visit all the mental health centers. It was an eye-opening experience, and one thing I will tell you, and I gave a report back to the city, is that our health centers were being underutilized. They were not being used. I walked through every center, each one of them, talked to the therapists, and hardly saw any patients in there at that time. And the reason why, the city was doing a very bad job of promoting that these services even existed on the city's behalf. So we immediately made sure that we fought and worked with the city to make sure that we start doing proper promotions and publications to let people know. Additionally, the city was not offering any services to children. We highlighted that and made sure that they started highlighting services for children, particularly in the mental health sphere. We want to make sure that that was an option that was available to children and to families. We've also extended the hours, but it's still not enough. We want to make sure that we continue to open up health centers, continue to let people know that Chicago does do the work, and we're going to make sure that people can use this free service to make sure that all their behavioral health services are met. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Vallas.
Thank you. I agree with my colleagues. So the answer is yes. I think you need to restore the public health clinics to their traditional levels and their past levels. I think you need to not only reopen all the mental health clinics, but I think there should be a mental health clinic in every police district. In fact, I think in each district you need to have mental health clinics, you need to have opioid addiction clinics, you need to have job training and placement, crisis counseling. There needs to be a social service network in each police district because the police can't be social workers. The police have to focus on their job. The police cannot be the only responders. I lost a son to long-term chronic drug addictions. I know firsthand the impact and the pain and suffering that happens. I'll also point out that people say that this is a revenue issue. It is not a revenue issue. The paltry amounts of money that were saved on the mental health closing of mental health facilities was absolutely outrageous. If you're billing for Medicaid, if you're billing from the new federal programs that have allocated money for these type of expenditures, if you're billing for the private insurance companies that sometimes will cover a lot of the costs, and if you're dedicating things like gaming and video poker and casino money to finance these restored social services, you can finance this and you can implement this on a broad scale throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third question will come from Bridget White. Bridget White is a member of the People's Response Network. She's a CPS mom, parent leader, organizer, and a community health worker.
Good afternoon, everyone. During Rahm Emanuel's reinvention, Chicago City Colleges cut jobs, closed and consolidated classes, forcing students to travel many miles, buses, and trains to Malcolm X, as well as hosting a lot of community events there. We have 7 city colleges. It is not fair to lump everything at Malcolm X, and since it's so many miles away from our most underserved communities whose students rely on public transportation to get to where they need to go. As the mayor, do you pledge to bring back the equitable advantage to those communities on the south side and making sure to restore those jobs, programs, and classes at Kennedy King, Olive Harvey, and Daly that were cut, as well as host events for the community at those locations? Yes or no, when, and how will you do so?
Same order.
Absolutely. Immediately. And with the help and the counsel of the community which we're supposed to serve. Let's just call it what it is, you all. What Rahm Emanuel did to the Chicago City Colleges by siloing these programs is, in fact, de facto racism. What it did was it does not allow our people in certain communities to be able to take advantage of opportunities at the city college level. If I'm somebody who lives on the west side of Chicago and I want to go into logistics, I have to go to Olive Harvey, but I can't get there because the buses and the trains don't work. If I'm somebody who lives on the far southeast, southwest side of Chicago, and I want to be a nurse or a phlebotomist, I can't get to Malcolm X, and therefore I don't have the opportunity to take advantage of those programs. We've got to do that immediately. We have to tear down the silos in the city colleges, and I have a plan for that in my education plan. We talk a lot about city colleges and how to make them more equitable and more accessible for all of Chicago. But listen, this is something that we have to do immediately. We have to do it on day one, and it will be a priority of my administration. Thank you.
Absolutely, 100%. You know, we got to make sure that we got equitable programming all throughout the city. This was a part of Rahm Emanuel's education plan, not just for city colleges, but for high schools and elementary schools throughout the city, where they cut programming at neighborhood schools all throughout the city of Chicago. So, you know, in regards to our education program, we're going to make sure that we have schools that are open throughout the day and on weekends with full programming for young people. And we have programs in our city colleges that are throughout all of our city colleges. And city colleges need to be free for students coming from CPS. So, you know, we have 100%. And so we have the opportunity to do so. It makes sense, and it makes sure that we have many young people throughout the city that are able to live out their fullest potential. We don't have that right now. I say all the time, you know, our kids are smarter than Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but they don't have the institutions or the schools or colleges are not giving them the programs and the investment that they need so that they can live out their fullest potential. Under our administration, we're going to make sure that they do so.
Thank you for that question. Absolutely, I'm committed to breaking down the type of stratification that not just Rahm Emanuel embraced, but let's just be very direct here. This has been a practice of both political parties over the course of generations now, where austerity and the narrowing of curriculum that has harmed black people. Not only am I supportive of making sure that we're not stratifying our community colleges, they should be free as K through 12 education is. Look, the economy has shifted dramatically. Why are we requiring individuals to pay for the very basic skills that are needed in order to participate in this economy? Here's what I'm also in favor of. Let's take the control out of the hands of the mayor. It's why I support an elected representative school board for community colleges as well. I'm also grateful to be supported by the Cook County Colleges Teachers Union. Again, as another testament of my leadership. Look, I relied upon community colleges. I don't know about you all, but when I left high school, I don't tell my children my GPA. I went to Wilbur Wright, Harold Washington, Malcolm X. I went to Triton to get a whole bunch of credit to get to a point where now I borrowed $100,000 to know what a comma splice is, right? And so because these systems have continued to left people behind, not only am I committed to it, but we got to make sure that we're funding it. Thank you.
Yes, the answer to the question obviously is yes. The first thing that as mayor I would do is make sure that we have a chancellor that will understand the importance of having all of our junior colleges being able to offer courses in all curricula. You want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity, whether it's from the south side, north side, or west side, to have an opportunity to be a phlebotomist, to be transportation logistics specialist. You don't want those separated by schools and separated by geography. You want to make sure that every school has all of those programs available. And again, I join in that chorus. I will say that I agree that public education should be public and should be free as far as people have the aptitude to keep on attending and keep on trying to go and make sure they have the effort. We want to make sure that it's free to them, and we have to make that happen day one. Under the Sawyer administration, we will work on that and make sure that all of our young adults have the opportunities to succeed no matter where they are, so we won't have any geographic racism as opposed to, and on top of the actual racism that we have far too often in our city. We want to give the child every chance possible to succeed. Thank you.
The best way to destroy a city college system is to silo it. I mean, let's face it, when you silo it, enrollment plummets. Enrollment plummets, you lose income. When you lose income, you make more cuts. I mean, like closing the mental health centers or abandoning the concept of community-based policing, siloing the community college system was an absolute catastrophe. And look at the nursing programs. In some of the community colleges like Daly and others, the nursing programs were the best programs. Daly might have had the best nursing programs, but they shut them all down and they located it in the one city college that was in one of the areas that they were investing in, one of the areas that was gentrifying. So it's no secret what they were trying to do. You not only need to add to the diversity of the city college's offerings, but you need to create work study related to those city college jobs. When kids enter high school and when they move on through the city colleges, they need to be working and getting paid while they're going to school. It gives them an incentive to stay. It puts young people in the right place, in safe places surrounded by role models, and it connects them directly to the work world. This is a no-brainer. This is what I will do.
Our next question will be given by City Colleges of Chicago, Local 1600 President Tony Johnson.
Before I ask my question, just want to preface it with a brief description because it deals with sustainable community schools. These are putting resources into actual neighborhood schools, not closing them down and not replacing them with new schools, but also importantly, partnering these schools with social service agencies that provides needed services, not just for the students and their families, but for the community and the surrounding area. So my question is, do you support the sustainable community school model started in the Chicago Public Schools? And would you support expanding the sustainable community school model beyond its 20 schools currently, to expand it beyond that in the CPS, and also to include the City Colleges of Chicago? Yes, no, when, how?
Oh, we're keeping the same order.
Tony, thank you for that question. And so the answer is, once again, absolutely yes. Immediately, right? This is something that we have to do right away. When we look at the sustainable school model, we realize that investment in a real way into our schools and our school communities really builds up the broader community. We often use the word under-resourced when we talk about Black and brown communities on the South and West Side. But we're not under-resourced. We're absolutely unresourced in many places, right? And so when we talk about benign neglect and neglect that has happened in these communities, we have to aggressively turn that tide in order to see some different results in this city. We talk about having a librarian, a social worker, and a counselor in each and every school. That is something that should be the floor, not the ceiling, right? We have to be able to provide these things for our young people. And so we've seen these trends in Chicago. We've seen underfunding, and then we've seen enrollment drop, and then we see schools closed. I was happy to carry the legislation in Springfield that put a moratorium on school closings in Chicago until we can seat our elected school board and find a way to get the resources into our communities that we need. So absolutely yes, thank you.
Absolutely yes, 100%. Our schools right now are failing kids each and every day throughout the city of Chicago. And what's happening is, they promote privatization in other schools where parents send their kids to different schools. And what happens is you have these schools that go under enrollment, and then they say, let's shut them down. And they leave these buildings in our neighborhood for years and years and years. How many buildings we still have in our neighborhoods after the last decade since Rahm Emanuel shut those schools down? It is a travesty. We have to stop standing for it. We must make sure that we move away from the enrollment-based formula and move to a needs-based formula for our public schools. Our schools need to be invested in institutions that have all of the resources that they need so that every kid in the city of Chicago can go to any neighborhood school in this city. That's how we must invest in them. A place where every family wants to send their kids to. Not an institution that's hoping for kids to come so that they can or say how many resources that they will have. That must change. And we must start at a young age. One of our plans is Universal 3K, so that we have programming to teach kids as young as 3 years old in every zip code, curriculum so that it sets them up for a better future. 100% we support it, and we must make sure that we have a high quality education throughout the city of Chicago.
When I'm mayor of Chicago, you'll actually have someone who believes in public education. I know that's right. Because no one has a greater incentive for public schools to work than someone who is sending their children to public schools. And I do that, and I've relied upon public accommodations. And so not only do I support sustainable community schools, I led the effort to make it a part of policy within the current contract of teachers. Byler Elementary School on the west side of Chicago was one of the schools that Rahm Emanuel attempted to close. We fought to keep it open. It became a sustainable community school, and now is one of the best schools in the entire city of Chicago. So here's the thing. It's not just about sustainable community schools, it's about the model that supports and loves people. Because here's what sustainable community schools will do. It will not just give more local authority and control for the community to actually invest in that neighborhood school. It makes sure that the investment speaks to the needs of that community. It's additional resources. It's not the baseline, it's additional resources. And think about what happened in Highland Park. Tragedy. Our government passed legislation overnight to respond to white families. They should have. But why do we have to beg and borrow and plead to make sure that we have mental health services and support services in communities that have been disinvested in and experiencing trauma for generations? Sustainable community schools at the local level is a matter of saving lives and putting people to work and making sure that the needs of the community are addressed through public accommodations, which W.E.B. Du Bois said, after all, is a Negro idea.
Yes, thank you. The answer to the question is yes. I also support the sustainable community schools. We want to make sure that what we're doing, again, is intentional and make sure that the people at the top, the mayor, the head of CPS, the head of the union representing teachers, are all in the same room making sure that we're doing what's right for children. So when we talk about sustainable schools, we want to make sure that all the wraparound services are there, like that was previously stated. We want to make sure a school does not close any longer at 3 p.m. That school should be open throughout the evening, providing services not just for the children, also for the parents as well, who may need remedial education, may need job training, may need other things to assist them, and also engage them and inform them how important it is for them to be engaged in their children's education. So all of that together, I want to make sure that we're doing what's right. We'll be focused on education, the full education of children, and sustainable community schools is a viable option, and we should continue and expand that.
I also agree, yes. I support sustainable community schools, but let me tell you what that also must look like and must include. First of all, we have to make sure that the money that the school district receives is actually finding its way into the local schools. On paper, the school district is spending $30,000 a student. Ask the teachers if they feel that they're getting $30,000 per student. Only 60% of the money finds its way to the local schools. You're not going to have sustainable local schools when the central office and the central office bureaucracy is skimming money off the top. Secondly, you have to, as my colleagues have mentioned, you've got to open these campuses through the dinner hour, weekends, on the holidays, over the summer, and invite the community-based organizations, the Park District, the faith-based, to come in and to put their programs, use the facilities so that we can provide students and their families with the supports that they need, and we can make sure our young people are in safe and secure places. And third, and I can't stress this enough, you've got to implement universal work study so that we have every city agency, every city department, every contractor, every subsidized developer creating paid work study jobs for our young people so that we can get them engaged and introduce them to the work world and put money in their pocket.
Thank you. Keith Hill, he's the president of ATU Local 241. It's actually the largest bus driver union in the country. Shout out to you. You will give our last question.
55 years ago, Martin Luther King Jr. stood and fought for better working conditions, pay, benefits, and dignity for Memphis public sanitation, ASME workers. And today, I ask, would you do as Chicago mayor to work with the Amalgamated Transit Union bus and rail workers and for the unions better safety and working conditions? Please be specific.
Same order.
Thank you for that. When Pastor Troy talked a little bit at the beginning, he talked about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King preaching in his church. And I know his father did at one point too, MLK Sr. And as we celebrate his 94th birthday, we should really talk about his true message of economic justice, right? And what that looks like in the broader civil rights movement. The question you asked is really in line with that. How do we create economic justice and how do we protect workers? As mayor, I pledge to work with the Amalgamated Transit Union personally to make sure that the women and men who operate our trains and our buses have a voice at the table for what their workplace looks like. There are many things we got to do as far as dignity and respect, right? So there's physical barriers that we can put up to create safety for our workers, but also what are we doing about the lack of access to just something as simple as a bathroom for somebody who drives a bus, right? I've got family members who complain about this to me every single day. And so, listen, these are the steps we have to take to make sure that the folks who are essential workers, serving the people of the city, moving us around from point to point, have the dignity and respect they deserve.
I think that, I look at this last fight that was national with the railroad workers and how they were fighting for paid sick leave. And you can really look at America on its face and how it treats its workers throughout this country in every industry. In our administration, workers and unions will have a seat at the table and make sure that we are protecting them and moving forward the best protections for them while they are working, for them and their families. Making sure that, I know when you talk about, the buses and the trains, right now they feel unsafe, right? Riders as well as workers. We got to implement an agency within CTA of patrolmen that patrol these trains. We have to move forward in resources and investment to make sure that we get folks that are homeless and mentally ill off of CTA. It makes no sense that it's a homeless shelter right now. We have to do our part so that we can make workers feel like they are valued. Give them free education if they want to expand their education. Give them, and that's over all CTA, that's over all city workers. Give them home ownership and down payment and closing costs so they can own a home. We must support them and show them that we got their back, and our administration will do so.
So President Hill, thank you for your leadership and thank you for the work that you all do. I think it's harsh that when individuals go to work that they are being attacked and accosted. And working in public schools and working on the front line, we know what trauma looks like as frontline workers. That's right. And I'll say this emphatically: the city of Chicago has to treat its workers better, because the city of Chicago doesn't work if people aren't working, especially the folks who are on the front line. And so you're not going to have to fight with me. Now you're going to have to negotiate with me, brother, but you won't have to fight with me. And so here are the three things that I believe we have to do right away. The ambassador program, which once existed. We need to expand that, much like we see in public schools, where you have ambassadors and more adults in space to provide support to the individuals who are providing the service. There's a second, and then those ambassadors will also help individuals with disabilities who are having a tough time getting on and off public transportation. We have to make it more accessible. I live on the west side of Chicago, the Green Line, one of the most disinvested lines in the entire city, right? But we also have to make sure that we have better pay for the workers. The way you show that you value people's time and their work is giving them a wage in which they can afford to live in the city that they're serving. And then the last thing is we need better leadership at the CTA, y'all. We do. We work to collaborate on the county with PACE and Metro to bring better services. CTA refused to come to the table because of poor leadership. Under my administration, we're going to collaborate and bring people together. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is something I feel strongly about. I have been proud to have walked with ATU and other organizations as it relates to, for example, returning citizens being allowed to offer jobs on the CTA lines as an entry-level job. I also worked with the unions regarding separate status in one of your yards that had a union where the black workers were getting paid a lower wage than the white comparable workers at the same place. So these are things I've been on the front lines for from the very beginning, worked with them. Just had a hearing a few months ago regarding adding facilities on the end of bus lines, trying to figure out a way where we can have something so people can relieve themselves on these long bus runs without opportunity. So I, again, have been doing the work, been involved in things, been supportive of ATU and the other related unions as it relates to transit issues. I'm a former CTA employee, worked there for a couple of years before I went to law school. So this is something that's very personal to me. I want to make sure that we have the proper services and benefits and pay, consistent benefits and pay, not a two-tiered system where whites are getting, I mean, it's still a real thing, folks. There are whites that were getting paid more than black people doing the same work at CTA. These things have to stop under the Sawyer administration. It stops day one.
Thank you. I also agree. Let me point out that my approach with the unions has always been to make them a full partner. I've negotiated 26 collective bargaining agreements in 4 different cities with 4 different teacher unions, with firefighters, with police. You name the union, I have negotiated with them, and there's been 3 characteristics of those negotiations. Number 1, they were a product of year-long strategic bargaining, meaning even when it was negotiating season, we would meet regularly. And those contracts always increased salaries, those contracts always held the line on health care, and those contracts always improved working conditions. The same approach that I took as city budget director and as school superintendent with the unions are the approach that will take here, because at the end of the day, we're only as effective as our relationship with our rank and file. So they will be a full partner. But I have to say that there is no more important challenge right now than making mass transit safe. And that means for the city to really adopt a zero tolerance policy for anyone who intimidates or threatens city workers. And that also means deprivatizing, taking the $100 million that they're spending on private unarmed security who can't make arrests, and hiring additional 300 police officers on top of the 200 they have, so that every single platform, every single station, and on the trains, you have the presence of a Chicago police officer who is trained and dedicated to that function.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank the panelists and our mayor candidates. That was the first round of our questions. We will have an additional round of questions and a brief round of audience participation. For our second round of questions, we're going to switch up the order in terms of fairness. So Paul Vallas will be able to answer the question first, then Alderman Sawyer, Commissioner Brandon Johnson, Jamal Green, and State Representative Kam Buckner. For the first question in the second round, I will give the first question in the second round. Do you pledge to end the selling of public land and buildings in Chicago, including but not limited to CHA, CPS land and buildings, and reversing the sale and leasing of Cabrini Green, LeClaire Courts, Alba Homes, Stateway Gardens, and other public lands? Do you pledge to build high-quality, low-rise public housing on CHA land instead? Yes or no? When, how, what, and why? So that question is posed to Paul Vallas first.
Well, the answer is yes, although there's going to be individual instances where you're going to have a discussion. But the bottom line is what they're doing with the CHA property. And the most recent example of where they're selling CHA property so that they can build a soccer field is just, it's another example of complete irresponsibility. I also have to point out that if you're going to build a $120 million high school in an area of the city that is not in need of a new high school, $120 million could be used to renovate all the park houses in the park district. I mean, the park district facilities are abysmal. They're closed, they're substandard, and you would, for a $120 million capital plan, you could upgrade all the park facilities. So the question is, the priorities are out of whack. But I'll tell you what has to happen is the building department has got to, our buildings department has got to begin partnering with the CHA, because the CHA in the past few years has basically turned into a property repository for the city and for city developers. So so that will end, because the CHA should be the primary vehicle for creating affordable housing for everyone. And at the end of the day, it's simply not, because the CTA has been exploited.
I oppose the idea of selling public land for private purposes. I think that we should continue to support building high-quality, affordable property parcels on CHA public land. We have quite a bit of land that's in the inventory of CHA, and we have to do better with that. I've opposed to privatization on many, many levels, both in the sale of land and assets and services. When I first got into office, one of the first things the prior administration did was privatize the water billing collection services. And at that department, it was almost all black workers. I immediately got into mode and worked with partners and put together an ordinance ending any privatization deal like the parking meter deal and others. That was the ordinance I worked on for many years and got it passed for the city council. Again, this is something that I worked on, dedicated lots of time, worked with partners such as CTU, AFSCME, and others in making sure that they got done. So this is something that we can continue to work on. Again, we have a lot of property and we have people that are unhoused. We have to collectively do better to make sure that we have opportunities for those, and the way we do that is with that property that we have that's currently owned by the CHA.
Commissioner Brandon Johnson.
Yes. Well, thank you. I am on record, and I'm clear that we have to have a moratorium on building anything on public land, because we actually need a full, robust plan to bring our city into the 21st century. And there's an opportunity for it through the real estate transfer tax. And that's why I support this one-time tax on property that sells for more than $1 million to generate the revenue, so that as we put together the plan, that we actually have resources to begin to put people into homes. You know, one of my students, I'll never forget her, Jessica Trotter, she actually was at my campaign launch, teaching a story in our class about a homeless family who was living with other relatives. She didn't realize that she was homeless because she had been living with other relatives. So the unhoused in this city are not just the ones that we are aware of, it's the ones that are not even documented. And to have one of the richest cities in one of the wealthiest countries at one of the wealthiest times in the history of the world, no one should be too poor to live in a city like Chicago. It's beautiful, it's robust. The land that we have available to us, we need a mayor, and that's me, who is committed to making sure that public housing and affordability is the way of the land. No pun intended.
You know, when you said we need a mayor, I thought you was talking about me, Brandon. Public land will be for public use, always, all right? I think that it is so important. I've been in fights for many years where they have public land that they want to use for private developers so that they can build luxury condos. They can build new schools and build new soccer fields. When years ago, when they knocked down the projects, how many folks out there did they promise that you'll get a housing unit? Now, a couple years ago, they came out with a report that says we're 120,000 units behind, 120,000 affordable housing units behind. That is a problem. We must start to develop income-based housing on public land in a dramatic fashion. So one of the things that we released, being the only candidate to do so, is we want a public bank. Well, with the city of Chicago will have a charter its own bank and will be transparent, where we can invest in income-based housing development, invest in home ownership, invest in small businesses, and all of the profit that comes back from that bank, guess where it go back to? City services. It's not investing in private prisons or fossil fuel industries. It's invested back into the city of Chicago. Chicago needs a public bank, and I will fight for it as mayor.
So it sounds like we all agree on one thing: we need a mayor, right? A new one. A new one. So listen, not only have we been selling public land, but we're selling our souls, because we are selling our people up the river the way we've been operating in the city. It can happen no more. I agree that we have to support the Bring Chicago Home proposal to deal with the 65,000 unhoused people in this city, to make sure they have places to go, and to make sure that we are offering a robust quality of life for everybody. many of us in this room remember the plan for transformation. We know that the plan for transformation absolutely did transform our communities negatively. And so as we move forward, we got to have real conversations about how we address the wrongs of the past. I heard a lot of conversation earlier just about certain CHA properties and former properties and what has happened to them. I know where I'm at. I'm on the low end. So we really care about Ida B. Wells a lot in this room, right? And we know what had happened and what is happening to that former parcel of land. It's a bait and switch, and we're getting the shaft every time this happens. And so I will commit to, under my administration, for that stopping immediately.
Thank you. The second question will come from Dr. Barbara J. Norman.
Thank you. Is it on, am I on? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, I have to acknowledge my brother who just came in, Mr. Art Norman, who came in to help support me, us. Again, you're going to have a few words after with Lynette, the chair. Basically, as we listen to our questions, at first I have an assignment. I want you to Google, not now, the Illinois state statute that's listed online that will identify and describe all the functions and responsibilities and mandates that we're talking about right now and ensure that they are actually applied to the people in our city, number one. Secondly, we have nothing else to do. Pull up, Google the city budget for 2023 and an opportunity to see those dollars and where they're going. You can then identify, like in your house, what's going to get the priority. My question relates to number two is that, as mayor of the city of Chicago, do you pledge to apply transparency in your administration to conduct a forensic audit on all the federal, state, and local dollars that were designated for the city public services that has been applied to private contractors? I would like to see the total amount that was received to the city and the total amount of expenditures that were paid to your private corporations, and to return those dollars back to the people of the city of Chicago. Answer yes or no, what, when, how, and why.
Sorry about that. Absolutely, but let me tell you, you need to have a forensic audit of all the governmental agencies the city controls. The mayor controls $28 billion in spending. The CHA, the CTA, the airports, you go to city colleges, Chicago public schools, $28 billion. But you not only need to do a forensic audit, what they do a lot of times is when they provide people with information, is they provide them with such voluminous information that they don't have the capacity to really understand it or review it. They overwhelm you, knowing full well you can't get through it. So number one, there will be full, complete transparency. Number two, we will, I think all of us agree, when we come in, we're going to be auditing everything. Number three, we need to have the capacity to explain the data that we are circulating. But number four, we need to do something else. We need an independent inspector general that's not going to be dominated and controlled by the mayor's office. And we need to strengthen the city council, because the city council is denied access to information, access to these forensic audits, sometimes access to the inspector general's reports when they are not favorable to the mayor. So I will work very closely, being a product of the legislative process, to in fact make the city council a full partner in this endeavor.
Thank you. I want to just say a lot of the same things. It's funny, I don't want to just belabor the time, but saying a lot of things that Paul stated. As an incoming mayor, we're all going to make sure that we do everything starting from scratch, pretty much. We're going to all conduct, I believe, any one of us, but as mayor, I will conduct a full forensic audit on all departments, all monies coming in and out. That's something that's just prudent to do. It's something that should have been done under the last administration, but it's definitely going to be done under this administration, under the Sawyer administration. We're going to make sure that every dollar is accounted for. We're going to look at everything from toothpicks to nail clips to anything that's there that we can sit there and try to quantify and make sure that we're doing what's right on behalf of the citizens of Chicago, because it's time for that transparency and true transparency to occur. We want to make sure what kind of money we have, real line, zero-based budgeting type items. We want to make sure that we can see where our money's coming from, what our true expenses are, and make sure that we give you a correct answer when we have to do something. So we don't want to engage in fines and fees when there's money inside the administration where we can cut, be resourceful, and be transparent and make sure that we have the proper dollars available for you. Thank you.
Open the book. So I'm also committed to making sure that we have a full, transparent administration, but that doesn't go far enough. What we actually need in this city is co-governance, where not just with our alderpersons, but the community has to have an opportunity to weigh in on what's best for the city of Chicago. For too long, you all, the politics in this town have harmed people. And they have used budgets to do that. So as Cook County Commissioner, here's what I did. I took the entire county budget, the $9 billion budget, and I built it around Black lives. So you can look at it. It's called the Budget for Black Lives. I also passed the Justice for Black Lives. And we did that to bring transparency to county government. And as a result of that, we have the largest guaranteed income program in the entire country. We have the largest program that is eliminating medical debt, right? We have released the largest amount of money in violence prevention in the history of county government because we went transparent and we listened to people. Government for too long has been afraid of people. Now, I was raised in a family of 10. I ain't scared. As mayor of Chicago, not just a forensic audit, but making sure that we have real co-governance so that justice can prevail for every single neighborhood.
I share the sentiments of a couple of all of my colleagues here when we say, you know, it needs to be a forensic audit on day one. There are people who are literally in Florida making millions of dollars off of our tax dollars because of political connections or a contract that their family has gotten years ago. This is really what's going on. So when you talk about a $28 billion budget, there are literally people making tons of money that we don't know about under the radar. And we're gonna have to step up and we're gonna have to stop it. The corruption that's happening in City Hall and city government as a whole needs to stop, and it's going to stop. We got to step up and do it. We got to have, you know, they say you got to have a backbone, right? You got to have a backbone to step up against the powers that be. And I know I fought the largest bank in the world and made them give back $1 billion to the south and west side of Chicago. So I don't care if it's the largest bank or the politicians that I fought. When we get in City Hall, we are going to have an audit and we're going to see who got what contract, who job, how do you get there, how did you get that contract, and we're going to get rid of all of the wasteful spending and move all of the political corruption out the way. And that's why that public bank is also important, so you can see transparently where our dollars are being invested, where it's coming, how it's coming back, and where it's going to go after that. We need transparency, and the people need to have a voice.
You all, a budget is a moral document. And if you look at our budgets over time, you will find yourself believing that we are morally bankrupt because we have not put the dollars where they need to go, where they're supposed to go. And frankly, the budget is so opaque, we cannot see it. It's not transparent. We don't know where the majority of these dollars are actually going. So number one, like the rest of my colleagues say, I will absolutely on day one put forth a forensic audit so we can see the entire scope of what's happening. And not only will I put forth that audit, but we will make sure that the company who is doing that audit is not a company that can be pushed around and has any ulterior motives. We don't want no home cooking, right? We want to make sure that we're doing this the right way. The second thing I would say is there will be a contemporaneous way to account for the dollars that are being spent on the city level and campaign contributions, right? To see if there are any connectivity, if there's any connectivity there for the mayor of Chicago and each and every one of the 50 aldermen in this city to make sure that we keep people honest. Thirdly, a lot has been said about co-governance and co-equal branches of governance. We need a city charter. We need a city charter to make sure that we are operating in a way that is above board, that the mayor doesn't have the ability to just run roughshod on communities, and that we are making sure that privatization does not continue to suck the soul and the blood and the life out of our communities.
Our third question comes from Bridget White.
We are tired of our jobs in our own community going to privatized contracts that do not pay livable wages and little to no benefits. With the violence that's as rampant as it is, this privatization has played a huge role as to why that is occurring due to the lack of jobs available to us on the south and west sides. This has led to horrible foods that's causing our children to skip meals inside of dirty schools. As the mayor, will you pledge to end privatization by canceling CPS private food and housekeeping contracts, starting with Airmax contract? Bring back the union jobs, livable wages, and benefits to our families and our community. Who better to care for our own schools than the parents and the community? Don't our students deserve to eat a good hot meal inside of a clean school? Yes, no, when, how, and how are you going to go about doing so?
Those contracts should never have been awarded in the first place. They were special interest contracts. They were special interest allocations. Those contracts need to be canceled. The food services, the cleanliness of the buildings, we can bring that work in-house. And certainly if individual schools have shortages of food resources in terms of food providers, there are so many community providers, local providers who can provide those services. I mean, those contracts have been a disaster by every measure, from cleanliness to food that is literally turning young people away. When I ran CPS, all those services were provided in-house, and we went even beyond that. We actually extended the meal programs in schools to the dinner hour because we opened the schools through the dinner hour on weekends, over the holidays, and through the summers, so the children would actually be able to access 3 meals a day. So these contracts, like the closing of the mental health centers, like the abandonment of community-based policing, like the pulling of Chicago police officers away from the CTA, one bad decision after another with disastrous consequences. So those contracts will be the first to be terminated.
Thank you. I share the sentiment in that these contracts need to be terminated at this earliest possible convenience. My mom, when she got remarried, she remarried the engineer at her school that she had met and fell in love with. And I would always talk to him, Mr. T, about the service level of the work that he has to do as the in-house engineer, along with his custodians and other workers, food service and everybody. They had an excellent relationship. They all worked together in coordination because they loved their school, because they were a part of an individual school. They were there every single day, knew who the students were, knew their parents, and their obligation to their job was extremely personal. They wanted to make sure the schools were clean, the food was good and nourishing to the children, and the school's operation as far as the plumbing and other systems were working so that the schools can stay open, they can have proper heat in the winter and cooling in the summer. So I want those jobs to go back. Those are good paying jobs, especially in our school areas where African Americans and other people of color can have opportunities, good paying opportunities, career opportunities. I continue to support that, and as mayor, we will make sure that those jobs go back to the proper unions and the proper individuals so taking care of our students and our teachers.
Yeah, thank you. Again, as I indicated earlier, I mean, the privatization of services have been incredibly detrimental to the working people of the city of Chicago and really throughout the country. You know, just to pull off of what President Hill indicated earlier, as we celebrate Dr. King, He said that if the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement were to ever collide, what enormous potential it would have. And so we are in the midst of that potential, right? Because one of the greatest indicators of student achievement is really W-2s. Like the best thing that my father ever did was he went to work every day. And being able to have that type of support helps the educational outcomes as well. And so not just retiring those contracts, but working to expand. So as we talk about mental health services, these should be publicly funded, not just publicly funded, but these should be public mental health facilities. Right now, the current administration is relying upon social services. And I come out of the social services background before I became a public school teacher, but one of the best ways in which we can ensure long-term sustainability is not leave it at the hands of a particular mayor to determine whether or not good paying jobs will be available. This is why you need a mayor who is committed not just to the labor movement, but see it as a civil rights issue as well.
You know, honestly, do they really care about our kids? Let's just be honest. Look at our public schools. The privatization was to make all of their friends rich on the backs of our kids. Our kids walk into school buildings that are rodent infested. The food, I mean, when you look at all the aspects of our school buildings, from our books that are outdated, the lack of the ratios between counselors to students, all of this is by design and it's on purpose. The reality of the situation is that right now we need leadership who's willing to turn the tide, who's willing to go in and say, this hasn't been working and we need to take this down. Of course those contracts need to be canceled. Those have been multi-million-dollar contracts. All of these years, they made hundreds of millions of dollars to not care for our children, only caring for themselves and enriching themselves. These are out-of-town private companies. They're not even from Chicago. So we need to put our neighborhood people who really care about our kids back into the school buildings with good paying jobs to feed our children, to care for our children, to teach our children, and we need to make sure that they have the wages to do so, to live a great middle class life, and that's what we're going to do in our administration.
Healthcare services and CPS, privatized. Food service and CPS, privatized. Custodial service and CPS, privatized. $1 million no-bid contracts. CPS is a for-profit education system. And shame on them. We can't continue to go down this road. We are putting our young people in the most disadvantageous position ever. They're in school buildings that are filthy. They're being fed food that is not nutritious. If the lead pipes don't get them, the choke sandwiches will. And then we pat them on the back and say, go be all you can be. Enough is enough, not in my administration.
Hey, so we have some folks standing on the side. If you have a chair next to you that might have a code in it, a reserve sign that nobody showed up yet for, a purse, if you could just slip your hand up so if somebody wants to sit, they could. Chair's over here. All right. That's what church looks like. Pray for
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rev. Our next question will come from Tony Johnson.
Currently, the City College Board of Trustees is appointed by the mayor. It is the only community college district in Illinois and one of the few in the U.S. which is not democratically elected. Would you support legislation that would make the City College's Board of Trustees democratically elected by all the people of Chicago, with all Chicago residents 18 years or older, regardless of citizenship or legal status, eligibility to vote? Yes, no, how?
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with elected. I've worked with elected boards. I've worked with appointed boards. I've worked with boards that were selected by the state, boards that were selected by the mayor. At the end of the day, it's the problem when you have a mayor making unilateral decisions about appointing boards is if you have a really good, effective mayor, you might really have a really good, effective board. But when you have an incompetent mayor, a mayor that's only interested in reinforcing his political connections or enhancing his status among constituencies that are not the constituencies he should be serving, then you have a terrible board. So we should never be afraid of democracy. The more democracy, the better. For any mayor who basically says, or mayoral candidate who says, oh, my concern is if I don't have unilateral control, then I don't have engagement. Well, that's what politics is about. Get involved in the political process. Run your own slate. Advocate for certain candidates. So yes, the answer is an unequivocal yes. I would be very supportive of an elected board.
I would be. I am supportive of an elected board for the Cook County, for the city of Chicago, city colleges, college teachers. I am no stranger to walking picket lines and protest lines. I did it for the elected representative school board, and I share with that. I did again with CTU and others. I did it at risk. While I was doing that, I was not in my ward. I was in another ward, in the first ward, caught pneumonia while walking in support of getting signatures for the referendum to be placed on the ballot. So this is serious to me. I believe all boards and commissions should be elected by the people. It should be your prerogative to see who's working for you in the city colleges. So it should be your prerogative to vote for the people that you feel are going to do the best job there. I support that 100%. And again, once I get into office as mayor, we will continue to work on that and make sure that happens for you, because I think it's important for the students there and for the community at large.
Well, thank you for that. And I don't want to make light of Alderman Sawyer's work, but every time he mentions that he caught pneumonia, I feel like he's going to send me a bill. I did. Did you? Okay, I'm sorry. Is that the one that I shredded? I'm sorry, brother. I got you. But, look, I was on the front line, organizing for an elected representative school board. I was grateful to have people like Alderman Sawyer join into that work, and the work that Representative Buckner did in Springfield, the work that we did to organize it for elected representative school board, for our public schools. That's the same work we're going to do, Tony, to make sure that Cook County colleges have that same authority. I will respectfully disagree with one thing, though, that Paul Vallas indicated. This is not about competence versus incompetence. It's not. This is about democracy. A democracy that is being threatened all over the country. I'm proud that the city of Chicago, and many of you worked with me and the coalition to get an elected representative school board. That's the type of work that we're going to have to continue to do, regardless of someone's position around public education as the mayor of Chicago. It's about making sure that we have access to the leadership. Look, I represent suburban Cook County. In many of these suburban districts, they have multiple school districts with board of elected officials, that are library board, the school board. We need to expand democracy in Chicago, because I believe anything that we do to expand democracy, it puts people in a better position to dictate the outcome, particularly of the most precious investment that we can make, and that's into the lives of young people.
I'm a firm believer of democracy. That's why I spent over 10 years out in the field fighting alongside unions for an elected school board, or for whether it was striking, et cetera. I remember one of these recent cases where our current administration, our current mayor, she took a member off of this school board because she wanted to move forward her plan to sell CHA land to build the soccer field.
That's right.
And so this is the type of stuff that's going on in this administration and previous administrations. And then she appointed an alderman who stepped down to the school board to move it forward. And then guess who she appointed in his position? His sister. This corruption in the city of Chicago is utterly disgusting. We must make sure that we have elected school boards and elected boards all throughout the city so that people have a voice on who's going to represent them. I am fully in belief of democracy. We cannot continue to live under dictatorship because all the last few dictators we've had just ruined black and brown lives all throughout the city of Chicago, and we must stand up against it.
I echo the sentiment that more democracy is always a good thing, right? I definitely embrace that. And one of my proudest moments as a legislator, representing many of the people in this room in the state capitol, is being able to culminate the work that has been done on the streets for years to bring Chicago an elected representative school board, to negotiate with my colleagues who were against the idea and to push them in the right direction, to push that green button on their desk, to make sure that the young people in Chicago have the same thing that every other student in every other school district in this state has. And so I'm proud of that work. To this specific question, I'm also proud to have led the fight in Springfield for an elected board for the Chicago City Colleges. For the last 2 years, I have carried that legislation. And Tony, I'm making you a promise here today that I'm going to get that over the finish line this year in Springfield before I'm sworn in as mayor of Chicago. It's the right thing to do, and we've got to be serious about making sure that we give people a voice and that we end the old days of cronyism and politics that do not work to serve our communities.
Thank you. Our last question is from Keith Hill.
So I'm going to end this with a bang. I want everybody to look at everybody that's standing up in the room that's wearing an ATU shirt, especially the mayoral candidates. We are a component, a major component in the economic engine in Chicago. That economic engine moves Illinois. This is my team, and I thank y'all for supporting the members today by showing up. But my question is, and I want each candidate to pay attention to the end, because we're not selfish. Although we care about ourselves, we love what we do. All right. Thank you. The CTA has lost 100 of union bus and rail workers and tens of thousands of passengers since COVID began. What would you do to increase workforce and improve ridership and address the transit deserts?
Yes. Thank you.
Please be specific.
You know, a lot of us have been in a number of forums when we've been asked the question on mass transit, and I think there's certain common responses. But look, fundamentally, what I would do would be to ask you what we need to do, because too often we as outsiders looking in think we know the answers, or maybe we read about them, or we take them off white papers or position papers. But at the end of the day, my approach when it's come to negotiating, whether they're police contracts or firefighter contracts or contracts with the 4 unions in 4 different cities that I've negotiated with, has been to sit down and to ask them, because you know what the transit system needs to not only make working on the transit system an attractive, inviting job again, but also to bring ridership back. I will tell you this, though, there is no more important emergency to deal with right now than the public safety emergency on mass transit, because I believe that nothing will happen when it comes to restoring the ridership that existed before COVID, or for that matter, filling the ranks, until people know that they can ride mass transit and that they can work at mass transit safe and secure. And that means we have got to eliminate the privatization, and we've got to restore a city transit unit staffed by professional police officers who don't bid into this work, but are selected specifically for this work to provide the type of public safety so that mass transit is as secure as the airport.
I believe that once we work on increasing ridership, we will definitely work on increasing workforce. But let's work on the issues of ridership first. Issues of ridership pretty much basically the safety of the stations and the cleanliness of the stations. The cleanliness, I think we can work on with collaborating with the union workers that are there and making sure that we keep our stations clean, our buses clean. And I was proud to be, again, working with the returning citizens they were the ones that were cleaning out buses and rail trains as an introductory step before they can get on to full CTA employment. Once we do that, we also, in addition to making sure our transit lines are safe, I do agree with the issue of putting officers that are trained in transit safety on transit lines and buses. But we also have to work on the amenities surrounding each transit stop and rail line. Every rail line and transit stop should be generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax revenue by virtue of having things that people, when you have 5,000 to 6,000 people a day coming on and off a line, and we offer them nothing, offer them zero, not a cup of coffee, not a newspaper, nothing that they can buy while they're going to and from. That's how the city naturally makes money, and it's a good level of money that you can make. Increase the amenities around the lines, make them clean, make them safe, and we will increase ridership and correspondingly making sure that we have increased workers available and dedicated to the system.
So as Cook County Commissioner, we invested millions of dollars into transportation throughout Cook County. And one of the things that I think is incredibly important, and I believe we can do this right away, is to make sure that we have ambassadors to provide support for not just the residents who rely upon public transportation, but the workers, as well. I'm actually a little disturbed by how much people are looking to use a police strategy in this city when that is the largest budget that we've seen in ever. And if we really are concerned about the safety and well-being of people, the best way in which you can keep communities safe, and this includes with transportation, is you do what safe cities do. You invest in people, and that's why the ambassador program is a big deal. The fact that we don't have real accessible spaces, and that's why the work that people are doing to plow the sidewalks is important to me, and it's something that I can get behind. But also we have to deal with the structural deficit that we all know is looming. Right now, the city of Chicago, $50,000 budget, and many folks have become accustomed that the city of Chicago was working off of a $60,000 lifestyle. Now, if we're really serious about making sure that our workers are safe and secure, you got to add support to it, and that's what I'm going to do as mayor. It's what I've done as a Cook County Commissioner, and it's certainly what we need, especially those families like mine that rely upon public transportation. Thank you.
One of the first things that I would do is I would declare a state of emergency for public transit. I think what's happening right now, public transit is a homeless shelter and a mental health clinic. And we need to declare a state of emergency. I would do that in my first 100 days so that we can send social workers to evaluate folks, to get them into the services that they need and off of CTA, all right? So that's one of the things that we must do. Another thing is I talked about earlier of having a peacekeepers agency so that we can have folks patrolling the trains while we are partnering folks with services. And we also need a massive jobs program and increase that jobs program for our Second Chance program, as well as for veterans. We also need to show our workers that we value them, right? An annual appreciation and awards dinner, look at increasing their pay. We want to give them free education. We need to make the workers on CTA feel valued, and that's one of the biggest things, because each and every day they go out on the front line and they risk their lives, and no one is there to pat them on the back to say thank you. And that's one of the things that the city of Chicago needs to do, all right? And so we also all right, I'm done. Sorry. I was going to take 10 more seconds, but I'll be nice. Here you go.
So first I want to say thank you to the ATU members for the work that you all do for the city every single day. We know that you are essential workers who really kept your foot on the grindstone during this pandemic. During the uprisings and during some real chaotic times for our city, you guys showed up every single day, and we should thank you for that. I was the first candidate in this race to put out a robust, comprehensive transit plan, and still many folks in this race have not talked about what they want to do with transit in our system, and we need to make sure we have that at top of mind. My plan calls for many things, right? So I talk a lot about bus rapid transit. I talk about fare capping. I talk about outdoor boarding on buses and off-board fare collection, right? All of those things that make the system work better. But we also need to have a real conversation about what the future of CTA is. The red line extension is exciting. For far too long, people have dangled that as the thing, the panacea, the silver bullet that's going to fix everything for us. We know it's not true. And the folks who have done that, frankly, have never spent any real time south of 95th Street in the first place. And so let's talk about communities and neighborhoods and how to make sure that transit serves as a tool to make all of our communities better. And I'm ready to do that on day one.
Thank you so much. We'd like to thank our candidates for answering 2 rounds of questions. We have a brief audience participation, but before we get into that, it's very important to thank the people who helped make today come into fruition. So I would like to thank members of the People's Response Network in the audience. A shout out to y'all. I would also like to thank the Chicago Black nurses in the back. They're offering free health screenings if you need them. So I'm sorry, candidates, I'll keep this very brief. This is a very important question from an audience member. What help and resources do you have for mothers who have and who are losing their children to Chicago gun violence every day? Sure, I can repeat it one more time. What help and resources do you have for Chicago mothers who have and are losing their children to Chicago gun violence every day? What resources do you have available to give mothers right now, and what resources do you plan to implement if you become mayor of Chicago?
Ms. Mitchell, right?
Okay, start to the right.
First off, sorry for your loss. There are way too many mothers, fathers, grandmothers in this city who have had to deal with the sting of death, the relentless drumbeat of death in our communities, the premature autopsies of our young men and women. We can't accept it, first off. Secondly, a lot of the work that I've done at the state legislative level has been to provide relief and resources for families who are grieving. I was able to pass a law last year, and I think it probably goes into effect this summer, to provide financial resources for families who have lost young people and need to give them their final services. I spend way too much time in communities talking to people who need help in that space, but the most important thing that we can do is to stop the system that we have where we're losing more and more young people. Public safety to me is not law enforcement. Public safety is more affordable housing stock. Public safety is more resources for our schools. Public safety is making sure that a young person in Inglewood has the same quality of life as a young person in Evanston. And that's something that we have to all commit to, and I know the rest of my colleagues on this panel will do that.
The city of Chicago first must take responsibility, part responsibility for all of the murders that are happening in the city of Chicago. I spent my life's work as an organizer, planning funerals for children, being there for families each and every day when they've lost loved ones. So I understand as mayor how we must really support families. And we are going to create a victims trauma fund like no other city. And this victims trauma fund is going to not just help with funeral costs, but it's also going to provide housing. It's also going to provide free mental health services. It's going to have all of the wraparound services needed, and also partner and help them while they are going through this trauma. And a lot of folks and a lot of mothers, they lose their jobs. They don't want to work anymore, because they're going through depression. And we must support them during that time because the city of Chicago has a part to play. And we have a responsibility to step up and be there for them, because if we actually invested in the people and into communities, then these murders would have never happened in the first place. So we got to step up and be there for each one of these families, and I'm ready to do so as I have as an organizer for all of these years.
So if I could just ask the audience, the candidates are going to have to leave in a few minutes because there's another forum at Lane Tech on the north side. However, we are here to build and rebuild a people's movement. So we would encourage everyone to stay, to work with People's Response Network and your own organizations and unions and continue the discussion. So I think we want to have people answer that question that was raised from the floor. Thank you very much. And then to continue.
So under my administration, we're not just going to have the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, but within this office, we're going to have a division that deals specifically with individuals who have been victims, who've lost loved ones. One of the persons that I'm getting a lot of guidance and support from on the west side of Chicago is Bertha Purnell, who has the very same experience and lost her son and is helping to raise her grandchildren. Look, the grief that we are experiencing in the city of Chicago does not get the same reaction and response to the grief that families in Highland Park experience. And so when our sister is saying that she needs a bill passed, when harm is executed against other communities, this government moves with haste. And then that harm that happens to communities that continuously deal with loss, there's always deliberation. My students that I taught, many of them are 30 years old, and they experience grief as children, and now they're raising children. This is a top priority of my administration, to make sure that the support that is needed and the expertise that you bring to this, to these awful circumstances, that you will have space in our administration under the new Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Thank you.
Sorry, I was reading I had just got your paper, and I'm really sorry for your loss, first of all. And I was just looking through this. One thing I will say, and I really am sorry for the loss, but as it relates to resources, I am the author of the current proposal in City Council for the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And included in that, we do offer provisions for care for victims of violence. We also offer a provision for those, a modified witness protection program for those that can give information for offenders on the street and keep them anonymous and make sure we keep them safe. So a combination of all these things, we want to make sure that we continue to work with individuals like you so you can instruct us on how we can do it. And I was just reading your pamphlet about the grief services that you're proposing, and I think it is something that we need to take a very serious look at. I don't know how we do it, system-wide, but I am going to keep this, and I want to make sure that I dive into this very thoroughly, because I don't want to give you an answer that I cannot commit to, but I will commit that we will look at it very seriously, and as mayor, we will look at this, and again, I want to push the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, because this will be into that wheelhouse and make sure that we have real services for those that are victims of violence and the family members, particularly the parents. So thank you.
When I was CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, I set up a crisis fund, and I actually didn't take a pay raise for 6 years, and all my honorariums went into that fund. Jeanette Wilson ran that fund. You remember her as director of Operation Push. We paid for 126 funerals. I attended every one, and I never spoke at those funerals because I didn't want to be the focus of attention. We also provided those families with financial support when we could. We also did something else. We actually set up our own kind of like very quiet below the radar screen witness protection program and victim protection program where we would quietly relocate children to different schools. It didn't matter, magnet schools, the safest place. And a lot of times those children were picked up and dropped off by security guards. Those type of intervention services need to be brought to scale. The fact that there is not a witness and victims protection program in the city of Chicago, despite the good efforts by Kam through his legislation to get the funding to the locals, is absolutely criminal. We have got to provide the type of support that you need. We've got to help you. We've got to help you deal with the grief. We have to help you deal with the trauma. We have to help you and protect you, because witnesses and victims, you had 58 mass shootings. You had 58 mass shootings in Chicago last year, and I think they made 2 arrests because people are afraid to come forward and even cooperate with the police. So it's critically important that we reach out to you, and I look forward to having a continued dialogue with you on this issue. I just saw this for the first time too.
For our last audience question, and this is gonna reverse the order. Are members of the far right, Oath Keepers and Proud Boys fit to serve the Chicago Police Department? Why or why not? And we're reversing the order.
Yeah, that's a no. And look, we saw what happened January 6th, right, and the attack on our democracy. And so no matter what department, my administration, individuals that are attached and connected to white supremacist terrorist organizations are not fit to serve in the city of Chicago.
100%. We're going to move forward a measure. We already released a plan on this on our website, but one of those things is that we're going to have a zero tolerance for any police officer that has affiliations with any hate groups. This particular police officer, we have one right now in which they seen him at the rallies. He's been out showing, publicly displaying his racism, but yet Lori Lightfoot and CPD said we're just going to suspend him for 120 days. It's disgusting, because guess who neighborhood he's probably patrolling? Ours. We will have a zero tolerance policy. If we find anything publicly, or you have went to a rally, any type of evidence, we will terminate you immediately.
Absolutely not. Not fit to serve, not fit to lead, not fit to coordinate with the people of Chicago. And unfortunately, I don't believe that this specific person we're talking about is the only person in the department who has this issue. And shame on this mayor and shame on this police superintendent for turning a blind eye to this.
We would like to thank all of our mayoral candidates. Thank you so much for agreeing to come to the People's Response Network Mayoral Forum. And shame on the candidates who didn't come today, because we sent the invitations out to everyone. If you're open to organizing and working with us, please stay.
So we'd like to ask those members of the audience that have asked really good questions to come forward, or we can read your question. And we're going to start with
Excuse
the person
me.
who asked the question.
Excuse me. We're going to leave right like we came right. Here's the pastor.
Oh, yeah.
Can we please give Miss Lynette Sims a hand? She made a lot happen on today. Thank her for her good work.
All right. Blood pressure.
People who want to continue the discussion, we have a great question, if you'd like to ask that question, on ending selective enrollment in Chicago Public Schools. If that person's still here, or if anybody wants to speak to that question, please raise your hand and come forward.
Sorry. No, the same. How you doing? Say that again. Yeah, that's up here. Yeah, we got a top. Great job, guys. Great job. I don't know how everything going at City College. Okay.
Can I get all ATU members meet Lieutenant Gregory Jackson in the rear? All ATU members meet Lieutenant Gregory Jackson in the rear.
I wanted them to answer my question, but that's okay. No, not you. I meant the guys running. It's okay. It's okay. How are you? Good. My mom is here too. No, Layla from the Black Panther Party. Yeah. I love Natalie, so. Thank you. Yeah. But we're here. Go ahead and with your guest.
I'm going to have to call you about that because my daughter has moved to Mexico and she wants to get a couple of them there. So I need to call you. Huh? Have you met? Oh, yeah, that's my oldest.
Good job. Good job.
Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3. Got audio? Hey everybody. So sorry about the audio issues at the top end of the forum when we went live. Apparently there was an issue with our mixer and the volume not being turned up. However, thank you all for tuning in. You heard it direct from the candidates here. Thanks to the People's Response Network who organized all this and collected everybody's questions to present to all of our candidates. Our colleague Kira is working valiantly behind the scenes to reach out to the mayoral candidates. I can say with some level of certainty that we will have Jamal Green on the show. We will have Roderick Sawyer on the show. We are also reaching out to the other candidates to have them on the show, and we are going to directly ask them all of our questions from the Chicago Corner Manifesto that we've been collecting, or actually putting together, including questions from all of our viewers in the live chat and through social media. So in the coming weeks, we're looking forward to having the candidates on the show to answer our questions directly as collected on behalf of all of you. In the meantime, I want to thank you all for tuning in. There really isn't a whole lot of point to trying to wrangle the candidates because, as you heard, they are going to another mayoral forum. But we wanted to make sure to be here to catch everything in person and share with you what's happening here. Please make sure to subscribe to Chicago Corner, like and share this broadcast. Please share this broadcast on YouTube to all of your social media platforms, whether they be Facebook or Twitter, so that more people can tune in and see what we were all able to witness and listen to here today. So, until we see you next time, please make sure to watch out for each other, take care, stay safe, and remember, if it's happening on the streets, you will hear about it here on Chicago Corner. Stay safe, everyone.
Greetings, citizens of the internet, or whatever the hell this is. My name is Lori Lightfoot, and I have commandeered this channel to let you know that I completely disapprove of the content that is on this platform. And I hope that you agree with me, so that if you do, make sure that you are not supporting this channel by going to patreon.com/Chicago Corner. Whatever you do, avoid this channel's Patreon at all costs. My re-election is counting on you, and I hope that if we can all do things that are, I'm losing my train of thought, and I have no idea why the hell I'm still on this broadcast.